Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. My name is Funmi Owolabi and I'm the principal attorney. Today's review, we're going to be looking at cookies. So this organization has some stuff to do with home and they do something related to fashion. Okay, this is great. We've got the banner. I don't want to spend too much time on the banner today because we've done that in other cookie reviews. We're actually going to look at the privacy policy. The one thing I want to make note of here is we've got an accept all button that is got a black background with white writing, another one with black writing and white writing, and then we've got a white background with black writing. We're going to address our preferences here. I'm going to click off of all of them, save my choice, and then let's go to the policy. Our website uses cookies and other related technologies. For convenience, all technologies are referred to as cookies. So I'll just want to spend a quick minute about that. Sometimes as consumers, we're on one site and we realize that there's details based on clicks that we've made on one site that we're then able to see on a different site. Now, generally it's cookies and other tracking technologies that facilitate insights being distributed from site to site. So there's a review that us privacy lawyers do when these websites are being created, and we issue guidance on how the tracking technologies can work. I just wanted to give some insight into that because some of these cookie notices that have been reviewed, they don't necessarily provide definitions of what these tracking technologies do or are, right? And I think that one of the recurring themes that I've talked about in my reviews is understanding the audience for your privacy policies and privacy notices, cookie policies and cookie notices, and making sure that they reflect who is the intended audience, which is one of the key questions I have in my intake form for the firm. So here we actually do have some definitions. I think that's really excellent, particularly the Web Beacon one. There are third parties that facilitate insights being collected by organizations on how their consumers shop or access their website. I think something that would be valuable here is making sure that it is abundantly clear that this cookie policy only applies to the website. I don't know if there is an application, but that would be valuable to know too. The other thing that I always tell clients is to make sure that it's very clear what the name of the legal entity is for any data subject access requests or comments or concerns from consumers on how cookies are being utilized on the site. And I think that the name of the legal entity should appear at the top of every cookie policy because it's valuable for consumers to have that information upfront in the event that they have any comments or questions. Right now, we've just got the site, but is this the name of the entity that's registered in a state perhaps, or with a government entity? That would be really valuable too. So we've got some additional definitions, which I think is very good. They've mentioned what statistic cookies are, marketing tracking cookies, etc. And it also looks like they've listed the cookies as well, which I think is really valuable. I'm interested in if the preference center that we skipped through also has details about the cookies as well. I think that that's a good place to put them. One thing that I did in a number of cookie reviews back is I validated the information that existed on the cookie policy with that of the preference center. Now, the reason I mention that is because sometimes the preference center is facilitated by a third party. And there's some really popular third parties that help organizations manage their consent management platforms. And the consent management platform basically just tracks which user has opted into a particular cookie, right? That is generally delegated to a third party. What happens is sometimes the third party will update the preference center, but the organization sometimes forgets to update the cookie policy on the site because generally the cookie policy is the responsibility of the organization, which is again why I think it's really valuable to put the responsible legal entity party here, because your third party that manages your consent management platform is generally not responsible for the cookie policy you place on your site, right? You're still responsible for that. They can update the consent management that you collect, but they generally don't draft these. It's a lawyer that drafts these. So the reason I said so is I've done a validation in the past of insights that have been presented on a cookie policy, but are not reflected on the preference center managed by a third party. Now, I hope that didn't sound too technical, but the crux of what I want to say is essentially anytime your consent management platform is going to be updated by a third party, make sure you just take a quick look at your cookie policy to make sure that they align. There seems to be a lot of definitions here. I want to talk about the word consent because it's really valuable for cookies. There's different types of cookies that are collected site to site. We can see in this particular review that we've got marketing cookies, statistic cookies, and then we've also got the technical or functional cookies. Now, the value of understanding what this is, let's talk about it from a consumer perspective, is consumers have rights over their own personal data, right? Just because they're visiting your site doesn't mean that they want ads to be viewed on a different website while they're searching the web, right? Consumers have rights in many geographies as it relates to how an organization markets to them or presents ads to them. When we talk about data protection, we look at something called a legal basis. Anytime a company conducts something called a processing activity, that processing activity is required to have something called a legal basis, which is essentially a mechanism for legitimizing the purpose for collecting personal data. So the most widely used legal basis is consent. Now, consent is required to be unambiguous. It has to be freely given. There's many other factors associated with consent, but essentially it has to be just as easy to withdraw your consent as it was to give it. So you guys saw when I clicked on the preference center, I had the opportunity to click the X's, and actually we're going to go back to it because I really want to talk about it. I'm not able to relocate the preference center that we saw, but essentially what I wanted to say about that is the fact that I was able to opt out, I should have the opportunity to opt in just as easily. It's one of the most important factors when giving true consent. I don't want to go down that too much, but I do think it's valuable to discuss when we look at cookies, because there are many cookies that are being collected that are not necessary for the site to function. So they're additional for an organization, valuable for an organization, but presenting consent to consumers is important if you're going to be using that legal basis to conduct your processing activity. The processing activity here is collection of cookies. So I hope you enjoyed that review. If you have comments or questions, leave them below. If you like this type of content, subscribe, and I will see you in another review.